My official designation is Chief of Port Security Vorlog of the Citadel Station X9. For 120 solar cycles, I have held this post, and for 120 cycles, my record has been perfect. My species, the Xylosian, values order above all things. It is encoded into our very being, from the rigid segmented chitin of our exoskeletons to the immutable logic of our hive minds. We are a species of 4 arms, compound eyes, and unwavering adherence to protocol. Chaos is a disease, and my function is to be the cure. I patrol the docking rings of X9, a gleaming monument to galactic cooperation and commerce, and I ensure the sickness of disorder does not find purchase. My gaze, filtered through 1,000 individual lenses in each optic sensor, misses nothing. The swagger of a void hauler smuggling contraband spice, the flicker of a diplomat's nictitating membrane during a lie, the subtle energy fluctuations of a cloaked weapon. I see it all. And then there were the humans. They were a relatively new presence on the galactic stage, and a constant source of mild irritation. Where a Xylosian moves with purpose, a human ambles. Where a Cathar warrior stands with grounded reptilian stillness, a human fidgets. They were inefficient, soft, structurally unsound. Bipeds with exposed skin, minimal natural armor, and a skeletal density that, by all rights, should have them confined to low-gravity habitats. Yet here they were, gallivanting across the galaxy. They possessed a litany of baffling social behaviors. I once observed a human male apologize to an automated sanitation drone after bumping into it. He spoke to the machine as if it possessed feelings, a concept so alien to my own logic-driven existence that my mandibles clicked in silent, analytical confusion for a full minute. They were fragile oddities, objects of a sort of detached pity. And on that day, the day my perfect record was shattered and then reforged into something new, I was observing one such human through my security monitors when the real threat arrived. It was the Cathar pirate vessel, the Grave Maw, captained by the infamous brute, Grok. They were flying under a falsified transponder, posing as a salvage crew, but their ship's energy signature screamed of aftermarket weaponry and illegal shield modifications. Galactic law, in its infinite and often frustrating wisdom, forbade me from acting on mere suspicion. I needed proof of intent, so I watched, my 4 arms crossed, my every sensor tuned to their frequency, waiting for them to make a mistake. They did. Their mistake was underestimating the fragile oddity. The Cathar pirates, for all their brutishness, were not fools. They were predators, and predators have an instinct for identifying the weakest member of the herd. From my multi-layered perspective in the security nexus, I watched their selection process unfold on a dozen holographic screens. 2 of their crew, massive reptilians whose scaled hides could deflect low-caliber kinetic rounds, disembarked. They moved through the crowds of the commercial spire with a predatory languidness that set my threat analysis software humming. They ignored the hulking Gorvan traders and the psionically gifted Luminians. Their gaze swept past my own incognito Xylosian patrol officers. Then they stopped. Their target was perfect. So perfect, in fact, it was almost a cliché. A human female. The station registry identified her as Dr. Eris Thorne, a xenobotanist en route to the Ganymede research outpost. She was, even by human standards, unimpressive. Shorter than the average for her species, with a frame that looked as if a stiff stellar wind could snap it in 2. She was clutching a reinforced specimen case to her chest, her head turning this way and that as she tried to decipher the station's multilingual directory. She was the textbook definition of a soft target. The abduction was as swift as it was brutal. The 2 Cathar simply converged, each one grabbing an arm. Her soft, pinkish skin was a stark, pathetic contrast to their gray, rock-like scales. She let out a small, surprised gasp, a sound that was swallowed by the ambient noise of the spire. No one even noticed. Within seconds, they had her off the main concourse and were dragging her down a maintenance corridor toward their docking bay. My thorax hummed with frustrated energy. Protocols were engaged. My officers were mobilized. Red alert icons flashed across my console. But an abduction into a docked vessel is a jurisdictional nightmare. I couldn't just breach their hull. That was an act of war. I had to petition the Galactic Council for a warrant. a process that could take hours. By then, it would be a recovery operation, not a rescue. I calculated the human survival probability. It was 0.034%. The Cathar were slavers and sadists, but they were also pragmatists. They would likely send a ransom demand for the fragile Earthling, knowing some bleeding heart human faction would pay. But they were also known for their cruelty, and the odds of her surviving the experience, even if a ransom were paid, were statistically insignificant. My internal monologue was one of clinical detachment. The human was a variable I had not controlled. The pirates were a threat I could not yet neutralize. The situation was an unacceptable disruption to the station's order. I felt a flicker of what a human might call annoyance, but to me, it was simply a logical assessment of a flawed outcome. The Gravemaw disengaged its docking clamps and powered out into the void, a cancerous black mark against the star-dusted velvet of space. 2 solar hours. That is the time it takes for a xylosian chrysalis to harden. It is the standard length of a mid-cycle nutrient paste break. It is also, apparently, the amount of time it takes for a fragile human to completely dismantle the command structure of a pirate vessel. We were still mired in galactic bureaucracy. My request for a warp interdiction field had been elevated to a subcommittee, whose members were likely debating the phrasing of the motion while the Gravemaw burned a hole through subspace. My own breach and clear teams were on standby, their carapaces polished, their plasma carbines charged. We were preparing to board a ship of horrors, expecting to find, at best, a ransomed captive, and at worst, grim evidence of Cathar brutality. Then the signal came. It was not the high-priority encrypted channel of a Galactic Union patrol ship. It was not a desperate plea from a hidden personal comm unit. It was a standard low-power automated distress beacon. And it was broadcasting from the transponder of the Gravemaw. My primary subaltern, Krell, swiveled his head, his own multifaceted eyes blinking in a rapid, confused pattern. "Sir," he clicked, his voice sharp with query, "a distress beacon from a pirate ship?" It was a violation of all known behavioral patterns. Pirates do not call for help. They run. They fight. They die. They do not, under any circumstances, advertise their location and vulnerability to the very authorities they are fleeing. A catastrophic engine failure? My long-range scans showed no telltale radiation bloom. An attack from a rival crew? The void around their last known coordinates was empty. A silent, black desert. My 4 hands flew across my console, my digits dancing over holographic interfaces. I bypassed standard protocols, invoking my authority as port chief to slice deeper into the signal. The origin was peculiar. It was not a shipwide emergency broadcast triggered from the bridge. It was being sent from a local comms panel, a panel located, according to the Gravemaw's stolen schematics, in their medical bay. What could possibly happen in a medbay that would warrant a distress call without the captain's knowledge? It was a piece of data that did not fit. It was a dissonant note in a symphony I thought I understood. My mandibles tightened. The disease of chaos was mutating into a form I did not recognize. My authority as port chief grants me certain liberties in times of crisis. Once a vessel broadcasts a verifiable distress signal, Article 7 of the Interspecies Security Mandate allows me to access their internal communications for situational assessment. It is a tool I have used only 3 times in my career, always to listen to the last, desperate moments of a freighter crew succumbing to vacuum. This time was different. The audio feed from the Gravemaw was not one of dying gasps, but of living, breathing chaos. Grak, the ship's captain, was roaring. I had heard recordings of his voice before. It was a sound that had made hardened mercenaries lay down their arms. But this was not the bellow of a triumphant warlord. It was a symphony of fury, frustration, and a strange high-pitched undercurrent that my translators struggled to define. The closest word was bewilderment. He was shouting about the specimen and a containment failure. The words made no sense. The specimen was the human. What was there to contain? Her fear? Her despair? I rerouted processing power, peeling back layers of the ship's security network until I found it. A low-resolution feed from a maintenance camera mounted on the ceiling of the detention block. The image flickered into existence on my primary monitor. The scene was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. The sterile metallic gray of the corridor was marred by a Cathar guard, one of the two who had performed the abduction, lying on the deck plating. He was not dead. He was convulsing, his powerful limbs twitching in a palsied rhythm. A thick, viscous foam, the color of spoiled vegetation, bubbled from his respiratory slits. In the cell beyond, its energy barrier shimmering with a faint hum, stood the human, Dr. Eris Thorne. She was not huddled in a corner. She was not weeping. She was standing perfectly still, her head tilted slightly, observing the dying pirate with an expression of detached academic interest, as if he were a petri dish exhibiting a fascinating new mold. In one of her soft hands, she held a small silver implement from her botany kit, a soil probe, perhaps. It looked like a child's toy. As I watched, her head turned. She looked directly at the maintenance camera, directly at me, and then she did the thing. The human thing. She pulled her lips back from her teeth. A smile. It was not a gesture of friendliness. It was not a plea for help. It was utterly devoid of fear. In that silent baring of her enamel, I saw the cold, predatory promise of a creature that knew it was being watched and did not care. It was the smile of something that had just set a trap and was waiting for the next victim to stumble into it. My analytical mind, for the first time in my adult life, was utterly and completely blank. My 4 optic sensors, each capable of processing a gigabyte of visual data per second, struggled to reconcile the scene. The biometrics of the downed Cathar guard were flashing across my tactical display in a frantic strobe of crimson. Massive, system-wide neuromuscular failure. The poison, and it was undoubtedly a poison, was terrifyingly efficient. Yet, my scans showed no traces of known chemical weapons, no residual energy from a dart launcher, nothing. The source was a mystery whose answer was standing calmly in a holding cell, holding a gardening tool. My bewilderment was interrupted by the clank of heavy magnetic boots. Captain Grack stormed into the corridor, flanked by 2 more of his brutes. His reptilian eyes, usually cold and calculating, were wide with a rage that bordered on panic. He jabbed a clawed finger toward the cell, his voice a gravelly roar over the comms. "What did you do, you soft-skinned witch?" The human, Eris Thorne, did not flinch. Her reply was broadcast into my command center with a clarity that was chilling. Her voice was even, measured, the tone of a lecturer addressing a slightly dim-witted student. She said, "He touched my samples. I told him not to." She gestured with a small tool toward the open specimen case lying on the floor of her cell. The cinderbloom pollen from Tartarus physiae is a potent paralytic to species with a cholinesterase-based nervous system, like yours, especially effective when inhaled directly from the source. You should really consider posting warning labels on your stolen goods. The silence in my command center was absolute, broken only by a series of sharp, involuntary clicks from my subaltern Krell. He swiveled his head towards me, his voice a strained whisper. "A botanist, sir? She weaponized pollen?" I did not answer him. I could not. My entire processing capacity was focused on the pirate ship. A botanist. A collector of plants. Using a flower's defense mechanism as a neurotoxin. The concept was so elegantly simple, so diabolically insane, it defied every military doctrine I had ever studied. We train to fight soldiers with blasters and ships with torpedoes. We do not train to fight academics with flowers. I watched Grack. I saw the muscles in his thick jaw working. He was a creature of violence and intimidation, a warlord who had carved out an empire in the lawless Outer Rim. But in the face of this quiet biological warfare, his tools were useless. He looked uncertain. The bewilderment was hardening into a new, unfamiliar emotion. Fear. He finally found his voice, barking at his remaining guards. "Stun the thing! Drag it to the medbay for analysis. I want to know what it is." It was the wrong order. He was still treating her like a specimen to be dissected, not a threat to be neutralized. It was a mistake he would not have time to regret. The 2 Cathar guards, their confidence bolstered by their captain's command, advanced on the cell. The energy barrier hissed and deactivated. They were massive, each one a mountain of scaled muscle and primal aggression. They moved with the certainty of predators who have never known a challenge from something so small. The human did not retreat. She did not cower. She simply waited, her weight shifting onto the balls of her soft-soled boots. As the first guard reached in with a four-fingered hand, large enough to crush her skull, she moved. It was not the fluid, psionically guided grace of a Luminian martial artist. It was not the brutal, overwhelming power of a Gorvan charge. It was messy. It was economical. It was an act of brutal, physics-defying efficiency. She sidestepped the clumsy grab, not by dodging away, but by moving into the pirate's space, letting his own immense momentum carry him past her. As he stumbled, she jammed her small, fleshy hand, the one not holding the botany tool, into the soft tissue of his neck, just below the hinge of his jaw. It was a motion of impossible speed and precision. A pressure point? That couldn't be right. A human's endoskeleton was too fragile, their musculature too weak, to exert meaningful force against a Cathar's neck. But the reptilian giant let out a choked grunt, his eyes widening in shock as his entire right side went abruptly limp. He staggered back, crashing into the corridor wall, his arm dangling uselessly. The second guard, seeing his companion falter, roared and swung his stun baton in a wide horizontal arc designed to shatter bone. The human did not leap back. She dropped. She collapsed into a low crouch, the crackling energy of the baton passing harmlessly over her head. And then, from the floor, she kicked upwards, not at his armored torso or his thick legs. She aimed her small boot at the one point of vulnerability. The knee, Joe. There was a sound, a wet, sickening crack that echoed through the comm speakers in my command center. It was the sound of bone and cartilage yielding in a way it was never designed to. The Cathar's leg bent sharply, impossibly backwards. The creature, a half-ton engine of destruction, collapsed with a shriek of pure agony, clutching the ruined Joe. The entire exchange had taken less than 3 standard seconds. It was a violation of biomechanics. A creature of her mass, from a world with a gravity of only 9.8 meters per second squared, should not be able to generate the torcus to disable a creature twice her size, from a world with 1.5 times that gravity. It was then that a forgotten data point from a xenology report flashed in my mind. Death world adaptations, high-density bone matrix, rapid twitch muscle fibers for predator evasion, extreme adrenal response. They weren't weak, they were compact. They were built for survival in an environment that was actively trying to kill them every second of their lives. Captain Grak was frozen. The roaring, indomitable pirate warlord was staring at the scene of carnage in his detention block, as if his mind had simply ceased to process sensory input. 2 of his best enforcers were disabled, one paralyzed, the other crippled, by a creature that weighed less than his own armored vest. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and the coppery tang of Cathar blood. Finally, his survival instincts overrode his shock. With a snarl, he drew his personal sidearm, a heavy-duty plasma pistol, a custom piece known throughout the Outer Rim as the Sun Spitter. It was a weapon designed to punch through starship hulls. He leveled it at the human. "Stay down, vermin!" he hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and raw fear. Dr. Eris Thorne, however, did not stay down. She rose to her feet with a fluid motion, brushing invisible dust from her simple gray tunic. She looked at the whimpering pirate on the floor, then at the sputtering guard against the wall, and finally her gaze settled on Grak, and she offered him terms. "Look," she said, her voice impossibly casual, as if discussing a minor shipping delay. "I have a research grant to deliver on Ganymede. This has been a terrible, terrible detour from my schedule. Let me off at the next reputable starport, and I will forget this whole inconvenient incident ever happened." The sheer, unmitigated, insane audacity of it sent a ripple of disbelief through my command center. Krell actually took a step back from his console. She was negotiating. After incapacitating 3 members of his crew, she was offering the pirate captain a deal. On his own ship. Grak stared at her for a long moment, and then he began to laugh. It was a hideous, rattling sound, a desperate attempt to reclaim his dominance. "You think you are in a position to bargain?" he bellowed, the plasma pistol humming ominously as he centered its emitter on her chest. And then the human did the single most terrifying thing I have ever witnessed. She smiled that predatory, teeth-baring smile again. Her eyes, which I had dismissed as simple, forward-facing optics, glinted with a cold, hard light. "Oh, I'm not bargaining," she said softly. From a small pouch on her belt, she produced a tiny, clear packet. It contained what looked like fine, black sand. Seeds. She held it up between her thumb and forefinger. "That cinderbloom pollen was just a mild neurotoxin," she explained, her tone shifting to that of a dispassionate lecturer. "A simple irritant, really. This," she said, crushing the packet between her fingers, releasing a fine, almost invisible dust into the air, "is much more interesting. Solanum dolor. The locals on Helheim call it sorrow vine. Its seeds, when crushed, release microscopic spores that are, shall we say, hyper-attracted to high-energy plasma containment fields." Grack's eyes, and all 1,000 lenses of each of my own, darted down to the humming pistol in his hand. "In approximately 5 seconds, the human continued, her voice as calm as a dead star. "They're going to trigger a feedback loop in your weapon's power cell, a catastrophic cascade failure. I would drop it if I were you. The resulting plasma venting is messy." Grack hesitated. It was for only a single, fatal half-second, but in that sliver of time, I saw the war on his face, the ingrained arrogance of a predator king battling a sudden, primal, instinctual terror. He was a creature of tangible threats, of blasters and blades and bulkheads. The idea of a weaponized seed, of microscopic death floating in the air, was a concept his mind could not grasp, not in time. The sunspitter in his hand began to whine. The low hum escalated rapidly into a high-pitched scream. A sickly green light pulsed from the weapon's seams, crawling over Grack's scaled hand. With a guttural curse that was half prayer, half profanity, he threw the weapon away from him. It was too late. The pistol detonated in midair, not with the ship-breaching blast it was capable of, but with a contained, horrifically violent eruption of superheated plasma and molten shrapnel. The force of the explosion slammed Grack back against the far bulkhead, with the sound of cracking armor and breaking bone. The camera feed dissolved into a blizzard of static, the audio overwhelmed by the sound of Grack's scream and the hiss of vaporizing metal. When the visual feed flickered back to life a few seconds later, the corridor was a ruin. The deck plates were scorched and peeling. Grack was slumped on the floor, his weapon arm a blackened, unrecognizable stump, his armor glowing cherry red. And the human, Dr. Aris Thorne, was gone. The cell was empty. The comms, which had been a channel of confused anger, erupted into pure, unadulterated panic. "She's in the vents!" one voice shrieked. "The aft life support just went offline," screamed another. "Sector 7 is venting atmosphere. Seal the blast doors. She's sabotaging the ship from the inside." I stared at the tactical schematic of the grave moth on my main display. It was a sight I will carry with me until my final molting. System icons were blinking out, one by one. Environmental controls in the crew quarters. Auxiliary power to the engine room. Portside shield emitters. It wasn't the chaotic, explosive damage of a firefight. It was the quiet, methodical, and terrifyingly precise work of a surgeon with a scalpel. She wasn't trying to destroy the pirate ship. She was disabling it, taking it apart, system by system, with an intimate knowledge of its workings that she could only have gained from a schematic she must have glimpsed for a few seconds. She was treating the entire pirate vessel like an unwanted specimen, and she was dissecting it while it was still alive. The panic on the grave maw reached its crescendo. Then, a new sound cut through the cacophony, a loud, repeating klaxon. The ship's main distress beacon, the one triggered manually from the bridge, had finally been activated. It was not a plea for help. It was a broadcast of total and unconditional surrender. In my command center, the tension was a physical presence. My breach teams were primed, their plasma carbines humming, awaiting the order to launch. Krell stood rigidly beside me, his mandibles vibrating with contained energy. "Chief Vorlag," he clicked, his voice tight. "Your orders?" My forearms remained crossed over my thorax. I stared at the schematic of the pirate vessel, a crippled beast bleeding its lifeblood of heat and atmosphere into the cold void. A ship full of hardened killers, brought to their knees by one fragile botanist. My entire worldview, a construct built on centuries of Xylosian military doctrine and biological certainty, had been inverted. The Cathar were not the hunters. They were the snare. and they had caught something that was now wearing their skin as a trophy. "Hold your positions," I commanded, my own voice sounding strangely resonant to my auditory sensors. "Wait for direct communication." It was a breach of protocol. Standard procedure demanded an immediate boarding action upon a signal of surrender to secure the vessel and any surviving hostiles. But this situation was anything but standard. Something told me that sending in my armored soldiers would be like pouring fuel on a fire I did not understand. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching into an eternity. The distress beacon continued its lonely cry. Then, a new signal sliced through the comms chatter, overriding every other frequency. It was not a Cathar voice, thick with guttural fear. It was her, Dr. Eris Thorne, broadcasting on the captain's private encrypted channel, routed directly and impossibly to my Port Authority frequency. Her voice was calm, though I could detect a slight increase in her respiration rate. "Port Authority X9, this is Dr. Eris Thorne, formerly a guest aboard the Cathar vessel, Gravemaw." There was a deliberate, almost ironic pause after the word guest. "The crew," she continued, "has been incapacitated. They require immediate medical assistance. I have secured the bridge and shut down all non-essential systems. The ship is stable, but adrift. I would appreciate a pickup at your earliest convenience. I'm afraid my botanical samples have been compromised in the altercation." Silence. I could hear the faint ambient hum of the Gravemaw's bridge systems around her. Then she added one more thing, her voice dropping a fraction of a decibel, losing its casual tone and taking on an edge of solid durasteel. "And you can tell Captain Grok," she said, "that I will be billing his clan for a replacement set of Cinderbloom spores. They are exceedingly rare. My official report on Incident 7 Gamma 4 is a document I am, in a bureaucratic sense, very proud of. It is a masterpiece of understatement and carefully selected terminology. It details the unexpected and highly effective resistance from a civilian hostage. It speaks of multiple cascading technical failures aboard the pirate vessel, Gravemaw, leading to the crew's incapacitation. It does not contain the word pollen. It makes no reference to biomechanically impossible pressure point strikes. It certainly does not mention a fragile bipedal female dismantling a hardened pirate crew of 12 with little more than her carry-on luggage and a terrifyingly encyclopedic knowledge of xenobotanical toxicology. The official record states that a crisis was averted. It does not state that a new one was discovered. We brought her aboard my command cruiser, the Vigilance. My medical team attended to her, a pointless gesture, as she had not a single scratch on her. She was, if anything, apologetic. She apologized for the mess on the Gravemaw. She apologized for overriding galactic emergency frequencies to patch into my private channel, explaining that it was the most direct way to resolve the situation. She apologized for, in her own words, overreacting a little. I stood before her in the debriefing room, my full 3 meters of height, my 4 arms crossed over my polished thorax, my compound eyes taking in every detail. And for the first time in my 120 cycles of service, I felt small. Her skin was soft. Her bones, by every metric I knew, were structurally deficient. Her primary sensory organs were unprotected and forward-facing. And she wore that unsettling bearing of the teeth gesture, the smile, not as a threat, but as a placid social lubricant. I looked at her, at this fragile creature from a high-gravity death world that considered continents crashing into each other, a form of geological adolescence, and I went to her file in the station's central database. I accessed her civilian profile. With a few decisive clicks, I deleted the designation Civilian Non-Combatant Protection Class Gamma. In its place, I created a new classification. It was a classification that sent my subaltern Krell into a state of rigid shock and prompted a month-long inquiry from Galactic High Command. It read simply, Species Human, Threat Potential Unclassifiable. Recommended method of engagement, Do not. Grak and his crew were pirates. They were predators. They made a simple mistake. They saw a sheep wandering away from the flock and thought it was easy prey. They did not understand, could not comprehend, that some sheep are born in a world filled with wolves, and, as a consequence, they learn to bite back with a ferocity that would make any wolf in the galaxy tremble in its den. 2 hours. That was all the time it took for a dozen hardened criminals to learn that lesson. And for me, Vorlog, Chief of Port Security, to learn an even greater one. That the most dangerous thing in the universe isn't the creature with the sharpest claws or the biggest ship. It's the one you underestimate.